You're kind of getting to experience the scare. You're then experiencing the, oh, wait, it's okay of it all. And then that actually gives you like a rush of dopamine. And that's what makes the scary story so exciting now. Kind of like that you've like survived the scary story.
Liz Gotauco, also known as Cosbrarian, is a public librarian, storyteller, and performer known for her comedic series Up Fairytales, which retells fairy tales and folklore with a healthy dose of wit and wisdom. For this episode, Liz tells me the history of the landmark children's horror book series Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that was a staple of elementary schools in the 80s and 90s, and probably the earliest influence on American hysteria. We discuss the writing and genuinely terrifying illustrations, the way it repurposed older folklore stories as well as modern urban legends, how the series became a rite of passage for kids all over the country, and the reason these freaky little volumes became some of the most challenged library books of all time. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. I am so excited to talk about this topic today with our new friend, Liz. So thank you so much for being here and for bringing this fantastic idea to me. I'm so excited.
I'm thrilled to talk about it. It's such an iconic series, like both for me as a librarian and a little bit growing up, even though I was a little bit of a wuss when I was a kid. This book still had a huge impact.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that in a second.
Please do.
But I think together we decided that we would start with a dramatic reading to get people back into the scary stories to tell in the dark feeling that so many of us shared in specifically, I'd say the 90s. So I'm going to start with your suggestion for a story to read. This story just happens to also be one of my very favorites. And of course, when we're talking about scary stories to tell in the dark, if anyone out there doesn't know what that is, I would recommend pausing this episode and going and looking at the art for this book series. And we're going to be talking about the art, certainly, but specifically, and we'll put this up on social media, but specifically the image of this story, the haunted house, because it's very much one of the most iconic drawings in this series, I would say. And if you read these books, when you see this image, it's going to rocket you back, and it's going to you're going to feel fear.
It's the scariest one for sure.
I think it is. I think it is too. Okay, so this is the haunted house. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire and lit a lamp, sat there reading the Bible. Then just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth. Then it sounded like someone was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do, and then just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly. Step, 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 step. Closer and closer. Step, step. And it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand and to lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to that house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearthrug. He did, and he found a big sack of money, and where that haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did come out. Ooh, I know. Very Christian version of the story. I know it is. But no, I just remember that one so well. And listeners, you can't see, but I am holding my original copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Oh, it's well loved too.
Well loved. Do you have your original?
Oh, gosh, I don't. I have my library copy somewhere.
That's nice, though. That's nice.
It is.
Well, now that we're in the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark vibe, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about what it was about this series that excited you enough to want to talk about it on the show?
Absolutely. I come from like a fairy tale and folklore love background. So, of course, some of my favorite episodes that you've dug into on American Hysteria have been these urban legends that kind of cross over into the folk. Well, they all cross over into the folklore space, but the ones that cross over into this like scary stories space. And I always think of that book when we listen to them. And I think, right now I'm a librarian and things are getting a little rough for libraries.
That's true.
And this is an iconically banned and challenged series. Like many, many challenged books, it caused a fervor of delight for many people, and it really pissed off a lot of other people. So this time of year with it being spooky season, it's also banned books week coming up. It seemed like a cool idea to dive into the work a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's really fun to have your perspective coming from kind of two different sides as a librarian, obviously, who deals with these book bans, and as someone who analyzes fairy tales and folklore. So you're just the perfect person to talk about this with.
Yes. And as an 80s baby who was there when it began.
Oof, when it all began. Would that be a good place to start? Should we kind of start at the beginning?
Yeah, so first I'll tell you a little bit about Alvin. Alvin was born in Brooklyn, New York on April 25th, 1927. His dad was a cab driver. I believe his mom was a homemaker. And he had a small, immediate family, but he had a sprawling extended family who all lived within a mile or two of him. And his first piece of writing was when he was 11. He created a family newspaper that collected the extended family's news. And I think this is very important, the family gossip, which is, of course, it totally makes sense for a folklorist who's going to be, drawing all these stories from people. And I also think it's very audacious. My family would not have enjoyed me circulating a newspaper of the family gossips. So he's a little Harriet the Spy moment. And I love that for him. And that carried over into his life because journalism was where he got his start, and his sort of journalistic expertise really fueled his folklore work as well. He had been writing for a long time before Scary Stories. His first book on folklore, which wasn't even his first book, came out in 1972, and that was on tongue twisters. He was kind of a word nerd, and that's how he made his way into folklore studies, and he really loved every area of American folklore. A lot of humor-based folklore he loved. He loved the tall tales, that type of thing. And it wasn't until 1981 that the first volume of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark came out. He'd already had some bestsellers before that. Those folklore books for kids did really well. But it is safe to say that Scary Stories kicked off something wildly huge for him.
Yeah, I'd say so for sure. And so when we talk about Alvin Schwartz as a folklorist, did he study folklore in college? Was he an amateur folklorist?
He was an amateur to start with. His early work in journalism and even his early work in books was more about American culture. He wrote about labor unions. He did a book on hobbies. He did a book on university culture. He did a bunch of books on parenting. And then in a time where the federal government was offering grants to expand education for youth, which what a novel concept.
Wow.
That's when he began writing folklore books for kids. And he came to it because it was an interest he had. And he moved to Princeton. He worked a lot with the American Folklore Society. That's when he became introduced to the people there. And he just got really into it. And that became his love language, I guess, his passion.
Yeah.
But he didn't start out that way. He started out, he was a journalist major.
And what's so interesting about that is the writing style that he has. Even as a kid, specifically, and I talked about this recently when we did the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs episode. We reread the version that Alvin Schwartz does. And I just, as a kid, even then, I noticed that the writing was so straightforward. It wasn't floral. It wasn't overly detailed. It was just telling you kind of the facts of the scary story. And for some reason, that scared me so much more than another type of writing style I think would have. And I think maybe that goes back to being a journalist and not needing anything extra because the facts themselves can be scary enough.
Absolutely. And that writing style is working on so many different levels, too, I think. It's not talking down to kids, which is a reason that kids like it, too. And it also, believe it or not, mimics the way that kids tell scary stories because, they don't tend to dwell on some of these grotesque details in the middle. You think of a story like The Big Toe, where I would say for many adults, just immediately the idea of cannibalism, the threat of it, and we're all thinking about the body horror. But for a kid, actually, the point of that story is to get to the end with the jump scare because that's a who's got my golden arm type of story. So when a kid tells it, he's there was this kid and he was out in the yard and he thought he saw a potato, but it was a toe. And he brought it home, he put it in the soup. But it's really leading up to that tension that the kid's building to scare his friends.
Yeah, that story's so good. I will actually now reveal to you my shirt because it is.
It's the Big Toe.
It's the Big Toe story. That's my, I have a Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark shirt on. Had to do it.
It's so good.
It is good. I really do love this shirt. So.
Yeah, I think I need that.
And I love that story. I remember that story so well as a kid. And I also had another folklore book on tape that did that same story, a different variation of it. But I just remember knowing that reveal at the end was coming, who's got my toe? But even no matter what, I knew it was coming. And every time it scared me in my little book on tape with my little Walkman.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And that's another like kind of amazing thing that Scary Stories does is it is a wonderful reading experience, but Schwartz is really encouraging kids to continue the oral tradition of storytelling.
Yeah.
And he not only like writes it in that style, but he adds like little stage directions and like the story will be really effective if you bring your voice down at this point.
Yeah, he does do that.
Which I didn't really think about until I reread it. I'm getting ready for this podcast and I just like fell in love with it all over again for that reason.
It's just so amazing. It is. It was like a collaborative kind of book. And I did love just not being talked down to. And I also feel like, did you ever watch Are You Afraid of the Dark when you were younger? Was that on your roster?
Well, no, because I was a nervous Nelly when I was a kid.
Nervous Nelly. Are You Afraid of the Dark felt like another 90s. I know this was 80s, but it was also so popular in the 90s, but it was a show that really, I felt, trusted kids to handle scary things and handle complicated stories that were also emotional. And, we need that so badly. We need adults to be able to connect with kids on an intellectual level because kids are smart and they're sensitive and they're emotionally aware. And, they also love scary stories. So I've always felt like he was one of my big folklore heroes. And this is absolutely the book series that started my obsession with urban legends because we've got The Hook, we've got Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, we've got High Beams. Those are, for me, kind of the big three, probably because they're in this book. So, I'm thrilled that we could be talking about this still to this day, and it still has value for kids. And so we're coming out of his life. He's here.
Sure.
He's writing Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It comes out. Take us there.
So in the beginning, it seems like most of the early days, there wasn't a lot of like pushback yet. We don't really see a lot of that pushback and the challenges around the Scary Stories series until we get into the late 80s and early 90s. Actually, interestingly, a lot of it happened even after he died. He died in 1992, which was just a year after the third Scary Stories book came out. But he had a wealth of scary stories then, not only the 3 volumes of Scary Stories, but he also wrote, I don't know if you remember the book In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories.
I do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Ghosts, Ghostly Tales from Folklore. That's another one of the like I can read books. And so I think at that point he was like, I'm not only writing these scary stories for older kids, but now he was kind of finding a way to bring a younger audience into it. Mm-hmm. I really love In a Dark, Dark Room.
Yeah, absolutely.
But these books came out in a time that was just like the perfect powder keg for everyone freaking out, basically. A lot of the info I have here is from this like incredible paper called Are the Children Safe? Ostensive Threat in Adult Interpretations of Schwartz and Gamble's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Angela Elisa Scotch.
Sounds great.
Yeah, you should definitely link that one. Yeah, so she like sort of contextualizes it with various things like the whole missing children panic of the early 80s with all of these like news stories really dominating the headlines with like Eaton Pats and Johnny Gosh and Adam Walsh, which is very funny because a lot of times when we like, have a nostalgic idea of the 80s, we're like, that was when a kid could just ride their bike across town. But there was a lot of panic happening. Yeah. That was the era of the kids on the milk carton or whatever.
Absolutely. That was stranger danger, baby. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have like the Reagan of it all. He kind of brought this new wave of crackdowns on freedom of expression, which of course included books and especially books in school libraries. And of course, the Satanic Panic, which is a particularly... What is the Satanic Panic? Are you a brand new listener to American Hysteria, friends? Of course, if for some reason, I guess you don't know, that was this era, I believe the 70s and 80s, where there was this huge widespread concern about Satanism and people luring children into Satanism. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting how Scary Stories fits into this, because, of course, one of the aspects of the Satanic Panic is there was this like blur between reality and not. And some of the repeated concerns about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is that, like, what if children think these stories are real? In the meantime, adults were falling for a lot of insane stories themselves.
Great point.
And there isn't a single mention of Satan or the devil, I don't think, in any of the Scary Stories books, but just the ideas that it brings up surrounding it, the cannibalism, of course, the occult, just made it ripe for people to freak out.
Yeah.
And then another, like, a totally different thing that was also happening in this era was that the landscape of children's books was changing. Publishers were like starting to like focus on marketing right to kids. Those like scholastic book fairs were taking off, which is another layer of independence for kids and their reading. And there was a huge surge in horror popularity, a little bit in the 80s and of course much more in the 90s with R.L. Stein, et cetera.
Right.
And teachers were starting to capitalize on this a little bit. You know, you see something that kids like and you're like, yeah, it can make school fun and hopefully it stays fun and you don't ruin the thing. So of course now there's a greater attention to this type of book, and maybe like parents who hadn't really been paying attention to what their kids were reading all of a sudden were paying attention a lot more.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, we are oriented in the time of roving bands of satanic cults and children being, you know, kidnapped at allegedly record numbers. But of course we know that that's not true. So yeah, it is quite a time to write children's horror, I would say.
It is.
Taking a risk there, Alvin. More after this. And now back to the show. So in the original, and I think I know the answer to this, but in the first prints of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, did we have our artist present, Stephen Gamble?
Yes.
Okay.
Stephen Gamble was involved from the beginning. Gamble's an interesting figure because he's very private.
And yes, I actually remember that. But I guess before we get into him, maybe we should just describe Stephen Gamble's like illustration style. Do you think that you could do that for us?
Absolutely.
It's difficult, but it's incredible art to me.
It's so atmospheric, I think, is like...
It's stunning.
The huge thing. I believe it's charcoals, and it's very spare in some ways. He plays a lot with light and shadow. A lot of the fear that he kind of builds is with the way he draws, the way he uses like proportion. Like everything's just a little off.
Uncanny. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also like a really purposeful way, I think, that the book was designed and the way the illustrations play with the text. For example, when you open up to the dedication, I think in the first one, it's the dedication, which is generally a pretty innocuous section of the book. It's like, says, to Lauren. And then it's also got like a picture of a hanging severed head on it. So immediately you're like, oh, but this is the nice cozy. I'm not even started yet. And already I'm started.
It's good.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So I think there's like some great like creature art, and no creature looks like any creature you've seen before.
No.
You know, he was a self-taught illustrator. He was just pulling stuff deep out of the imagery he was getting from these stories. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what you said about the text. Like, it's pretty simply done and allows the reader to add in the extra level of horror within all that vacant space.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, the quality that I also always loved is like the way, there's no other word for it, but like the wispiness of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like everything is like floating out from a center point in this really interesting way. And
nothing's really grounded.
Yeah, but truly scary. I mean,
yes.
You know, and maybe we'll talk about this, but when they changed the art, I don't know how long ago it was because it was too scary.
It was in 2011, I think.
It didn't hit, man. It was not right.
No.
And all respect to the new artist, but it just wasn't Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark without Stephen Gamble. So great. Well, now we kind of, you know, and again, I encourage everyone listening to make sure that you know what we're talking about. Go look at some of this art. And, you know, just get on board because it's beautiful. All right. We can keep going with Stephen. Let's talk about him.
So Stephen Gamble, he's still around. He was born in 1943. He grew up in the Midwest in Des Moines. His father was an art editor for like magazines for like Meredith Publishing, which did a bunch of huge magazines. And so like art was all over his house, and his father encouraged it. And as I said before, Gamble is self-taught, and that's how he kind of came into illustration. He has also had a very prolific career. He's illustrated 72 books.
Wow.
From like 1973 to 2013. He did at least one book a year, and some years he did like 5.
Wow. Okay.
His style is actually very, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not all scary.
He's got a range.
Exactly. He's got range. Mm-hmm. He won the Caldecott Award, which is like the highest achievement a children's illustrator can win for the best illustrations of the year. It's for this lovely, cozy little book called Song and Dance Man about a grandpa that used to do vaudeville.
Wow. That sounds great.
I can send you a picture if you want.
Sure. Send it. Oh, yes. This is so like... so different and yet so similar. It's
Yeah, you know,
very cool.
Like, he still plays with like a lot of that white space like he does in Scary Stories, but then he uses like the color really beautifully. It's very warm.
Yeah, it is.
And he appears to me to be also just like a lovely, warm person if, you know, when you see his portraits and stuff. I'm not sure what his relationship is to the Scary Stories illustrations, because his work is now being housed at the Mazza Museum. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. In St. Paul, where he lives with his wife. And when they were building that collection, the curator there said that Gamble was actually kind of hesitant to include the Scary Stories illustrations. And all it says is that he said that there's such a powerful response to them. And apparently at the museum, there's some kind of like disclaimer there. And I'm still like intrigued as to what that nervousness was. Like, did he not want to bring that attention to the museum? Does he just have some mixed feelings about the work? But it's pretty wild that like some of your most well-known illustrations, you're like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't put these out in the world.
Maybe it's too scary. Yeah. I mean, that's I would imagine that it was stressful for him at times when the controversies were out there, and you know, maybe he just felt like it would be distracting. I don't know. I mean, to me, these deserve to be in the best museums in the world.
Yeah, Hall of Fame, for sure.
Hall of Fame, yeah.
And he's done some other horror illustration with some like series that haven't stuck around as much. This one called the Eerie series. He did one for a book called Halloween Poems, and they definitely have the same quality, I think, that Scary Stories does. But for some reason, I think maybe it was the combination of his illustrations and Schwartz's story that really made everything stick. And you do see in the challenges that parents are facing, they don't really come hard after the illustrations. It's really the whole vibe and the plots and what they get into that made people mad.
Sure. So how did Alvin Schwartz and Stephen Gamble meet? Were they just kind of paired together by the publisher, or did they have a pre-existing relationship?
I wish I had an answer for you for that, but I do not.
That's okay.
I do know that, you know, that consciously once Schwartz started writing like In a Dark, Dark Room, he was like, Gamble is not the illustrator for this particular book, because this is going to be for first, second, and third graders. Sure. So they went in a different direction there. So sorry, I don't have that answer for you.
That's okay. I mean, like you said, there is a kind of a dearth of information about Stephen Gamble. He is very private.
Yeah, I guess he specifically told the documentarian who made Scary Stories, he said, I'm like Bill Watterson. I just, like, I made the thing. It's the legacy that's left, and I don't really want to deal with it.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
And which only makes him cooler, frankly, to me. You make these insane, scary illustrations, and then you're like, I'm out.
It's cool.
And I'm out like Bill Watterson, who is a very cool person to allude to as well.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Okay. So I imagine that what's coming up next in our story are the controversies that surrounded this book series. So how did all of that go down?
Oh, yes. So as I mentioned, there was sort of an explosion, especially in the early 90s, of challenges against these books and many other works. And it's interesting. Initially, the responses were mostly in terms of the occult stuff, much more related to the satanic panic. And that even popped up actually for Schwartz's early folklore books. He wrote this book called like Cross Your Heart and Spit in Your Hat, all about superstitions. And there's a section where it says, if you would like to become a witch and talk to the devil, this is what you should do. And it was really just to like record the supernatural beliefs of like days gone by. But it literally is like, it does come across as an instruction manual on how to worship
I could see
Satan.
how that could be misunderstood in the climate that existed in the moment.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that was a concern initially with these challenges. But then at some point, it just became about how scary is too scary for kids. And some specific incidents that happened, it's actually hard to blame the parents. There were a couple of instances where like a first grade teacher in Raleigh and one in Michigan like read the Scary Stories to their first grade class, which is just a really bold choice.
Really bold.
I'm sure there are kids who are that young who like them, but it wouldn't be, you know, I'd wait probably for third or fourth grade myself.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
And so, you know, these first graders, apparently, you know, one of them was like, I can't eat anything. There might be people in that sausage, after hearing like the wonderful sausage story. And another kid who was crying themselves to sleep, worrying about the worms they were going to eat when they died. And And that's when people really became concerned. And they were trying to figure out like what types of books are appropriate for your school library. And there was this big seesaw between the people who were really fighting for the books and the people who wanted them gone. And sometimes kids got involved as well, standing up for them, which is kind of great. There's one article that represents the pushback, and there's one article that represents the love, which is why I sent those over. I don't know if you want to open the one that says icky. Yeah, definitely open that one.
Sure. Yeah, it says Salem Kaiser School Board votes to keep icky library book. I wish that towns were better at like digitizing their old, like weird town meetings that are mostly boring. But for this specific circumstance, I would just love to deep dive into a bunch of people bitching about this book. Oh my gosh. I do think this is worth reading. It's short, so I'm going to read this for everyone. This is from the Statesman Journal by Dave Burns. And it looks like this is from what year?
Oh, when is this from? 1990 in Salem, Oregon.
Okay, so yeah, from 1990. Here we go. It has black and white illustrations of corpse-filled coffins and blood-covered feet dangling from a chimney. But a less than enthralled Salem Kaiser School Board voted Tuesday to continue circulating in elementary school libraries a book containing a collection of horror stories. The 1981 book Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz raised the ire of Dennis Spooner of Salem, who argued that it was, quote, alarmingly satanic. Quote continues, "Are we willing to be responsible for the kind of behavior this book promotes and teaches?" Spooner, who has 4 children and is a former literature teacher in Illinois, said, quote, "If you provide them with junk values, you're going to get junk behavior." One sentence that especially annoyed Spooner read, quote, "No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet from which the flesh had rotted." Board member Vicky Berger voted with the 4-1 majority to continue placing the book in school libraries and said, quote, "This is not exactly my taste in literature, but I do not find it particularly satanic. The stories are somewhat inane." Craig Smith cast the board's sole dissenting vote, saying the book, which is targeted for readers 9 and older, should not appear on elementary school shelves. Board member Neva Hutchinson summed up the sentiment of most, saying, quote, "I have only one word on this book. It's icky." I love a dramatic, like, some kind of town hall meeting or, like, it's just, I love reading about it in the newspaper. It's so,
I know.
This board meeting is amazing. I just wish I could have been there.
Yeah.
I wish I could have seen it.
And old news reports. There is the documentary Scary Stories does kind of follow one woman who had like a real vendetta against the books in particular. Although she seems like a lovely person, honestly.
We all get a bee in our bonnet about something, don't we?
It's true. And then on the flip side, if you open the other article, you'll see just what I love as a children's librarian.
Oh, it's so lovely. And can you tell me the year on this? Is it same year, 90?
It is a little later. It's from Lincoln, Nebraska, from March 1995.
Okay. It's the headline, big bold headline, "I'm scared and I like it." And it has 5 kids in very 90s outfits.
Oh, yeah.
With their arms around each other, kind of like doing a smiling, screaming face at the camera. And this image does fill me with a lot of joy. And I wish we could go back.
Yeah. And, Schwartz did this great interview with Leonard Marcus, who's like a children's literature dude, who asked him about the bans. And Schwartz said, it's really interesting. I was sent this paper one day from Colorado. And he said, and on one side of the page, there was an article about these are the nominees for the Children's Book Award for Colorado this year. And one of them was In a Dark, Dark Room.
Wow.
And then right next to it, there was an article about parents trying to get that book out of the school library. And if you go through your newspapers.com or whatever you can find with that, that's exactly what you see. You see these articles of these little panics in these little towns. But then you also see like editors like rounding up like the best new books for kids. And that book is always on the list. Sometimes there's like kid reviews of it and they love it. There was one really cute one of a kid just being like, and the best thing about this book is I can go tell someone the scary story. And then after I scare them, I get to do it all again with someone else.
Ain't he right? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, as always, it's like a push and pull, a little bit of seesaw. And it's all right there in the history, which is just fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So when people were trying to get these books banned, how successful were those attempts? Like, were these actually being pulled off the shelves, or was it more like we were getting really close to it and then free speech was saving us at the very end?
So I can't believe I haven't mentioned this yet. Despite the fact that Scary Stories was the most frequently challenged children's books of the 90s and was at like number 7 in the 2000s and was still at like number 24 in the 2010s. It's stuck around.
Dang.
Yeah. But in the 90s, it was the number one, like the kind of the combined responses to all 3 books made it the most challenged book of all time. In most cases, the books stayed in schools. There was one school system that did remove them in Vancouver, Washington, and that was seemed like a real shit show, frankly, of like, at first they voted to keep it and then people appealed it and then it was just like, all over the place. There was like a million editorials. And, I think some things that worked a lot in Scary Stories' favor is librarians loved it because it's immensely researched. Something that a kid might not get into. Maybe like you and me, kid, got into it. The future folklore people.
Yes.
We're like, ooh, look at all these notes in this big bibliography. I mean, it's so researched and he packs it all in there. So it's really this like master class on how to become a folklorist and how to appreciate folklore and history. So librarians were like, this is a really valuable piece.
Yeah.
And, we get that it's not for everyone, but it's a really vital thing to hold up for American culture. So that saved it a lot. And then, like many current book bans, because the book bans of the 80s and 90s are very similar to the book bans of today, other than what they're targeting.
Right.
A lot of this was like drawn out of context, of course. And so when luckily, I don't know that they're doing as much these days, these school boards and stuff would actually read the book. As you saw in that article that you read, they were like, this isn't as bad as everyone's making it out to be. Yeah. Actually, and I even noticed that rereading it these days, some of the stories they come across as like a little antiquated just because of the era that they were written in. So it's kind of laughable, actually, to imagine the uproar that they created.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that like when you're talking about this series value, what is also interesting about it is the really different kind of sections that this book has and the different types of stories. I mean, when we're talking about the high beams or urban legend, we're talking about an axe murderer in your backseat, and you're being followed by a big truck that's putting on its high beams to save you from getting murdered. I mean, that's an intense story. Then we might have like folk rhymes, like "Don't You Ever Laugh When a Hearse Goes By," which was something that I memorized in elementary school. We had to memorize a poem, and that's
adorable. And I love it.
I do feel that it was adorable. I would like to see that video of myself. Yeah. But, then so we've got these like folk rhymes. Then we have much more classic folklore stories that almost feel like fairy tales or feel like
almost like more like literary ones. I think like The Haunted House.
Yeah, totally.
For sure.
And some that are like truly folksy and that they aren't really about murder, but there's even some, and I of course I have no idea the accuracy, but there are like some indigenous stories in here. And yeah, I mean, it's a genuine piece of like folkloric work.
Yeah.
It's for kids, and yet it really speaks to so many things that are just far beyond childhood.
Absolutely. Especially some of those, like the ones you mentioned, like High Beams and The Hook. And I think of like The Dead Man's Hand, where it's like a college prank.
Yeah.
He was pulling a lot from like college urban legend and folklore too.
Yeah.
Because it operates in a similar way to like kids' scary stories, where you're just like looking at this huge world that you're about to launch yourself into and who knows what's going to fucking happen.
Yeah, truly.
And that's the way that they're processing it.
More after this. And now, back to the show. So I thought that since we're talking about urban legends that Schwartz wrote, that I would read just a quick classic called The Hook, because this was one that definitely really affected me as a kid, and probably almost everyone has heard it. But I'll just read it really fast. It's really short, but just to get the feeling of what it was like to be a kid reading these urban legends, and the ones that would really go on to change my life into the present day. So, all right, The Hook. Donald and Sarah went to the movies. Then they went for a ride in Donald's car. They parked up on a hill at the edge of town. From there, they could see the lights up and down the valley. Donald turned on the radio and found some music, but an announcer broke in with a news bulletin. A murderer had escaped from the state prison. He was armed with a knife and headed south on foot. His left hand was missing. In its place, he wore a hook. "Let's roll up the windows and lock the doors," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away," said Sarah. "Maybe we really should go home." "But it's only 10 o'clock, said Donald. "I don't care what time it is," she said. "I want to go home." "Look, Sarah," said Donald, "he's not going to climb all the way up here. Why would he do that? Even if he did, all the doors are locked. How could he get in?" "Donald, he could take that hook and break through a window and open a door," she said. "I'm scared. I want to go home." Donald was annoyed. "Girls are always afraid of something," he said. As he started the car, Sarah thought she heard someone or something scratching at her door. "Did you hear that?" she asked as they roared away. "It sounded like someone was trying to get in." "Oh, sure," said Donald. Soon they got to her house. "Would you like to come in and have some cocoa?" she asked. "No," he said. "I've got to go home." He went around to the other side of the car to let her out. Hanging on the door handle was a hook. Great. I mean, that is like something you do want to read as a kid because it's teaching you something. It's all right there. The hook is a story about boundaries in a lot of ways. It's a story about a girl saying, "I don't feel safe."
Absolutely.
And the guy is making fun of her,
yes,
being mean, really, and being misogynistic
For
as
sure.
well. And the girl needs to follow her intuition. And she's right. The hook is a story that we can get into the Freudian analysis, but we're not going to do that today. But, I think it's important that, even in this, it's showing young girls that they're allowed to have boundaries. And
Yes.
I think the way that it's written feels very intentional in that way as well. It's not just a scary story. It's a scary story that you can learn something from as a kid who's going to be a teenager soon.
Yeah, and also for all kids that they should trust their instinct if something feels off, if something feels weird, even if it's someone that you think is your friend or someone you love.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Absolutely.
I was also thinking about when you were reading The Hook, and I was thinking about how important the community building aspect of this type of folklore is, which you talked a little bit about in kind of telling stories with your friend, handing it around, but also kind of how it connects us more broadly. Mm-hmm. Because of course, every town has their boogeyman kind of like that. In Rhode Island, there's this guy called Freddy Fingernails, which has nothing to do with Nightmare on Elm Street. Some people will be like, our Freddy Fingernails is Freddy Krueger, but it's not. It's not, people, okay? But, and it's just that story here all the time. This man in the woods lost his children, and now he's grotesque. He's grown his fingernails out, and he's coming after everyone else. And I love the idea of kids reading scary stories, and this Hook story or whatever being this reminds me of this hometown story I know, and that connects them to a kid in another town. And God knows, I'm sure a lot of kids who read scary stories, you feel like a little weirdo, but you're not, because these stories connect us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some other fun facts I love about it is he did get a lot of the stories from kids. The Viper in particular, he mentioned he heard twice in the same week, which was why it ended up in that book.
I remember that one. Can you tell us that tale? Because
sure.
It's cute.
Wait, let's see if I can remember. Well, so essentially, we're at this hotel, and the people staying there start to receive these terrifying phone calls. And when they pick up the phone, they just hear, "I am the Viper, and I am coming soon." And they're like, "Who the fuck is the Viper?"
Who's the Viper?
Who's the Viper?
Yeah.
He keeps calling, updating when he's going to come. It's a little bit of babysitter downstairs. But of course, at the end, what they discover is that the Viper is a window washer, and he has come to wipe their windows.
Which reminds me of Dwayne the Tub, I'm Drowning. Do you remember that one?
Sure.
It's But it is like a joke. It's a joke within a story, a folklore story.
And he always summed, that's how we ended each of those volumes too, is with a thing of funny stories, which I appreciated because while I would never have brought that book home, my younger sister did.
Okay.
Which gives you an idea of our relationship.
So she was a little braver.
She was like, I don't know if she brought it home to torture me specifically.
Well, you never know.
Yeah. And I would like look at it on the table and I would be like, I cannot read that book. That book's going to freak me out. That book's going to freak me out. But it was so magnetic.
Yeah.
And I would definitely read it. And if it didn't end with those funny stories, I do think I would have been a little more scarred by it. But that like helped me like close the book, put it away and be like, okay.
It's a palate cleanser kind of thing.
For sure.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, just thinking of you and everyone else that were afraid of this book for good reason, because the cover is very scary.
It's so scary.
It's so scary.
A clown smoking a pipe?
Yeah, with like no lips,
Yeah.
just like a skull head with no lips and like a weird red nose, corncob pipe, some graves, like an old abandoned looking barn or house in the background, a moon. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's very scary and it's incredible. It's like stunning to me. And I just think it's like, a parent is immediately going to know that this is an intense piece of work here just by the cover. It's bold, it's a bold cover.
It's so interesting that when they redid these illustrations in 2011, I think it's Brett Hellquist who did it, who is a wonderful illustrator. And he has like done some stuff in like the macabre world, like he did the Lemony Snicket illustrations. And so it wasn't like a wild choice, but definitely not the right choice. And I think one of those reasons, like you just said, is I think it would be really easy for a parent to be like, oh, this is going to be a cute book of ghost stories. And they bring it home to their kid and their kid gets nightmares because it doesn't like convey what you're about to get into with those kind of the newer Gothic illustrations. They also, speaking back to that haunted house illustration, the most terrifying one, and the structure of the book, that's like the one illustration that like you turn the page and it's just like there. Yeah. And your jump scare happens immediately.
It's a total jump scare because it is like a very large face. And you don't really expect it because it's different than the perspective of pretty much all the other drawings. You don't have this like close up of this rotting woman's face. It's so good.
Yeah. But then interestingly, it works just like that story does, where the fear is really in the beginning of this haunt and of the specter, but then the story is actually kind of sad. Yeah. And this like wonderful murder mystery too. Mm-hmm. So that like kind of story, as opposed to like these stories that lead to the jump scare, you've got this one where it starts scary, but you work out the scariness by the end. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just an amazing range in what's presented.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in like defense of these books, Schwartz said some really nice things about like what he thought like folklore could do for kids. Mm-hmm. He really saw folklore as a way to boost confidence in kids because they have ownership over the stories in a way that they don't always get with children's media. And there's a lot of like evidence that supports this. In some of these like studies, there have been numerous studies about like the relationship of children and horror and why kids respond to it in certain ways and why adults respond to it in a different way. There was a study on some children who were hospitalized due to illness and how much they loved telling ghost stories about like the space they were in, and so I think like that's a great illustrative way of how they're kind of like taking ownership of this folklore to survive a very immediate thing. It also really served, and Schwartz talked about this as well, how folklore also kind of serves the marginalized, and marginalized groups are always like the first to be attacked in these like book bans.
Yes.
And I think of that particularly in terms of like this like hospital of kids who like really need an extra hand, and why it's so sad then when I see these books get attacked.
Yeah, really.
Have you seen the movie inspired by Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark?
Yeah. I liked it. Did you like it?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
I definitely. I think like the idea, the structure of it was really interesting. Yeah. The way they made their way into it. But it's interesting. Well, I think one of the reasons these book bans happen is that, I think I alluded to this before, is like how adults receive and contextualize horror as opposed to kids, and how we're seeing it in like the terms of these headlines and stuff, but also we're like in a sensory way experiencing it differently. And the movie is a really good illustration of that. Again, like bringing it back to the big toe, how when the kid tells it, it's more about what's going to happen at the end. But in the movie, they really like dig into like the body horror and the sensory ick of like eating the stew that you don't know what's in it, and like literally putting a toe in your mouth and pulling it out. Because that movie is for, I think, readers who grew up on it. It's not a movie to introduce kids to this type of horror. And kids, there's so much like with body horror and slapstick comedy, they're kind of like entwined too. Yeah. Which is another way like Scary Stories works really well with like melding the funny and the not, because just like the way this kind of weird scary story of like your head falling off or whatever is going to help a kid process the weird shit that's happening to their body. Yeah. That's also why they like laugh hilariously at like the, I don't know, Itchy and Scratchy show.
Yeah, totally.
You know, dismemberment is like a huge way that kids process like weird body shit.
Yep, that makes sense to me.
So yeah, I just like love an author that like really empowers kids.
Yeah.
And it just blows my mind when people don't see that in the work itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when we're talking about, you know, you mentioned how it can help kids process and understand, like, I have a body and it's confusing and I can look at this kind of metaphor in front of me that feels true in some way that maybe I can't access psychologically yet.
Absolutely.
What else do you think that horror can do for kids? Like, as a librarian, you know, you see what kids are reading. Like, what do you think is the value of these kinds of scary stories? Because, I mean, we go after them. I mean, I was a seance, slumber party, Bloody Mary kid for sure. And that's all folklore, right? That's the same. We've been doing these same things for centuries, really, in different ways. And kids are drawn to the ghostly, to the occultic. You know, they're drawn to these things that kind of live between childhood and adulthood. There's like this liminal space where we still have this imagination, but we're also facing kind of the dangers of the world. And I think that is, for me, where the empowerment comes in, is like meeting kids where they're at and showing them that there is value to this liminal space that they're in, and that it should be taken seriously and that it matters. And I just think that so much of what we got in the 90s did that. And, you know, the 80s and 90s did that for us. Like we mentioned, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And even Goosebumps in a lot of ways, maybe to a different degree of quality. But
sure.
Love you, RL. But yeah, so what else do you think as a librarian, like what value can horror bring to kids?
Well, I think we're always looking for sort of like safe spaces for kids to have questions answered or to deal with questions that can't be answered simply. And I think books in particular are the best way to do that. And with a scary story in general, because even just the physical act of being able to like close the book and put it down, it allows kids to self-regulate and kind of figure out their own limits within the story. Some of your like greater podcast world people have talked a lot about being an anxious kid and using sort of the otherworldliness and the bigness of horror to kind of ground yourself and be like, I can get through this, you know, sillier thing. A more recent example is during the early days of the pandemic, there was like a huge uptick in a request for like scary stories in libraries. Librarians were noticing it.
Interesting.
And it's because kids were like, well, I think I need to read about something that's worse than this hellhole that I'm stuck in right now. And the path of a scary story. I mean, sometimes the path of a scary story is that it's scary and then you die, but other times it's scary and then you live.
Which is mostly true for scary stories told in the dark. I would say most people live. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Scary Stories also does the thing where parents freak out about this, like the cannibalism, like in the sausage story, but it's actually a story about domestic violence. Like the guy like fucking kills his wife. I'm like, aren't you mad about that?
Nope.
Are we glad that he got it in the end, frankly?
No kidding. Yep.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the number one way that horror is extremely valuable for kids, because we don't want to like throw anyone out into the world with nothing to prepare them. And it's understandable that a parent can think like, well, why do I have to prepare them with something insane like this? And terrifying. Why? I don't want them to have to worry about that. But, you know, I also don't want a kid to have to just like face the reality of the world with no preparation either.
Well, and I guess nobody's saying your kid has to read scary stories to tell in the dark.
No one is.
But, you know, if your kid is drawn to it, like I was, as soon as I saw that book, I was off to the races. This was my shit, you know, and luckily I grew up in a family that loved horror. So there was no problem at all. My mom, I think, probably loved these books. She read Goosebumps books with me. We loved all the scary things. And that obviously then informed my entire future and career because I was allowed to move toward the thing that brought me the most excitement and the most feeling. And so it's like, when we have these banned books, when we have these scary stories, no one is forcing anyone to read them. They're just there for those people that end up needing them or wanting them. So it's just, if you are drawn toward something scary, you gotta go toward it. You gotta.
Yeah, it's so important that kids get to read what they like to read.
Yeah.
We will never get out of this literacy crisis if we don't allow that to happen. And that's like across the board for scary stories, for junk, supposedly, junk books. Like, I was a big Babysitter's Club fan. My mom's like, please read something else. And I was like, no, never.
Don't take my Babysitter Club. Yeah.
Exactly. It's consistently shown that if you keep giving kids books that they like and that they're drawn to, they're going to be readers for life.
Yeah.
And that is so important. And just like you shouldn't push your kids into reading horror, but if they are reading horror, there's actually some really interesting science behind how like the brain reacts to horror. For kids that like horror, how horror and dopamine are linked. And it's basically when you're reading like the scary story or experiencing it, your like thinking brain is giving you feedback to your emotional brain, and it's helping your like that part of your brain reassure itself. So it's like you're kind of getting to experience the scare. You're then experiencing the, oh, wait, it's okay of it all. And then that actually gives you like a rush of dopamine. Yeah. And that's what makes the scary story so exciting now.
Cool.
Kind of like that you've like survived the scary story.
Yeah. And it does give the like rite of passage vibe that is so important that we just don't have a lot of in. I mean, we have it, but, we don't have very formal versions of rites of passage in Western culture. And so these things start to act that way. The slumber party games become a rite of passage.
Yes.
Sitting and braving these books and passing them on to your friends and being brave enough to cross that threshold into something that resembles adulthood just a little bit more. I think that is just a part of what it means to be a human. And we can't really escape the need for ritual. And to me, scary stories feels like a tome, like some kind of mystical text that you can pass on through your group of friends. Because that was the other thing, is like one person would have the book and then everyone would like try to borrow the book or
pass it around.
Yeah. And so it was this sort of, like a spiritual text that we could read from and then be allowed to move into a new phase of life through facing fear. And I think that's just, there's something, it's more than a book to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, people forget that like that sort of element, that sort of like legend tripping or doing these little rite of passage, witchy whatevers has been a part of all of us. And some of it is just so ingrained. People don't think they're like practicing witchcraft when they knock on wood or whatever, but you kind of are. Yeah. And so I think like that kind of ties into it. I think people need to get they need to get with the weird and the nebulous, and the fact that the weird and the nebulous affect children just like it affects us. And if that would help maybe calm people down, maybe not.
Maybe. So Liz, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to you for bringing this topic up and giving me an excuse to muse on it and to learn about its origins and its story from you. So I know that you wanted to end maybe in the way that you ended your own reading as a kid, a palate cleanser, something silly to pull us out of this child's nightmare we've been in. Would you like to read that for us?
Yes, I would love to send everyone off with a smile.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I'm a storyteller. I've taken a little bit of artistic license with this one, but I think you'll remember the story well. And this was a favorite of my sister and mine as well, which is another reason I picked it. And this is called Bloody Fingers. One night, a businessman pulled into the one motel in town at the end of a long work day. He asked for a room, but the clerk pointed at the sign. "We have no vacancy." And the businessman noticed a single key hanging on the board behind the counter with a keychain labeled number 13. "Well, what about that room?" the businessman asked. And the clerk grimaced. "We don't rent room 13. "Well, why?" the businessman asked. "Because it is haunted," the clerk reluctantly answered. And the businessman scoffed. "I'll take it," he said. "I don't believe in ghosts." The man went up to the room, a rather unimpressive room, just as boring and empty as he expected. He changed into his pajamas and he went to bed. And then behind his closed eyes, he sensed a flickering light. He turned his head toward the closet, which emitted a pulsing glow, and the door began to rattle, as if someone was trying to push through. A low, tortured voice began to moan, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." And suddenly the door creaked open, and two ragged hands dripping with blood and flesh rotting off curled around the edge of the door. The man jumped out of bed, grabbed his suitcase, and bolted right in his pajamas. The next night, a musician arrived with his guitar case looking for a room after a late gig. Again, all of the rooms were taken except room number 13. "I'll sleep there," he said. "I am not afraid of ghosts." He settled in for the night, grateful for the rest. But once again, the closet door began to rattle, and the odd, pulsing light seeped from the seam of the door, and the ominous voice began moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." And the musician jumped out of bed as the ghost's decaying hands, wet with gore, curled around the door. The musician snatched his guitar case and, holding it in front of him like a shield, got the hell out of there. A week later, a third guest arrived, ready to take room number 13. She was a writer, and she had a deadline to meet and a noisy, distracting family at home. "Whatever room you have is fine," she told the clerk. She settled into the haunted room, opened her laptop without even turning on the lights, and began typing. And soon the closet door behind her rattled, and the eerie glow poured from behind it, and the frightful voice began to moan. "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers," it cried. The writer squared her shoulders and tried to concentrate, but the ghost kept moaning. "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." The writer put on her noise-canceling headphones and gritted her teeth. The door shook harder and harder, and the light grew so bright it glared off the laptop screen. The spirit's voice rasped and sputtered. "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." The ghost slipped his fingers around the door frame, streaking the white molding with dark red stains. "For fuck's sake," the writer cried, whirling around. "Would you shut the hell up and get yourself a Band-Aid?" The fingers meekly retreated back into the closet, and the door quietly closed. The ghost did not bother her again. The end.
Thank you for that modernization. Yeah, you really brought it into the present day.
You're welcome. I don't know. It's something about this, like a tired mom being like, "I don't have time for this fucking bullshit, okay?
Get this out of here."
But my sister and I would just like moan bloody fingers to each other. And then, of course, in the old version, of course, it's the musician who's like, "Cool it, man. Get yourself a Band-Aid." That was just like sung all through our house.
Yeah. And I mean, as a kid, it's like, it's so funny. It truly is such a funny, like it is taking control of the fear and making it into something funny. And as we know, that is very valuable. So
yeah, definitely.
Liz, this has been so great. Before we go, I know you have a book coming out. Would you just give us the elevator pitch so everyone can get excited?
Yes, I'd love to. I think if you grew up on scary stories, if you loved scary stories, I actually think you'll really like my book. It's called Up Fairytales, Sinful Cinderellas, Prince Alarmings, and Other Timeless Classics. And it's sort of a reclamation of old, weird-ass fairy tales that explore adult themes, because for so long, fairy tales have been seen as these little, like, moral tales to teach children, but really they existed for a long time to help all of us suss out the issues with our lives. So there are stories about like our family dysfunction and baggage, and there are stories about love and sex. And of course, there are very gory stories. I have a whole section on those. And there are stories about our weird bodies and all of the things they do.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a humorous look at that. And I'm really proud of it. It comes out October 7th if people are interested in it.
Ah, so exciting.
Other than that, go to your library, please.
Yes.
That's what I would also like to say.
Hug your librarian, even psychically reach out, because y'all are heroes in my book, and I am still a constant user of the library. So it's it's a very, very special place to me. So thank you for being that person out in the world who is continuing to like carry that torch for our young people. I think that's just incredibly brave at this point, too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Whenever I feel like I'm not doing enough in the world, that's what my therapist says. She's like, "Well, your job is just inherently political now, so you're just doing things already." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I can't lean on that, can I?"
Well,
But sometimes it feels like it.
We can at least highlight it today, so.
Yeah. Well, I love being here. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm sure we will have you back for some fucked up fairy tale content in the future.
Ooh, I would love that.
Thanks, Liz. This was American Hysteria. If you want to learn more about Liz's work and pre-order Fucked Up Fairy Tales, follow the link in our episode notes. And you can find Liz on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Cosbrarian. That's Cosbrarian. If you want to support our show, ensure that we can continue making it, and get bonus content and ad-free episodes, just go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get access to Hysteria Home Companion, the other podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we cover or stories that we just know that you'll love. We have a huge back catalog, so as soon as you sign up, you will have plenty of content to dive into. If you go to AmericanHysteria.com, you can pick up some of our new merch, and 100% of the profits go to support the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led mutual aid group that's delivering food and supplies on the ground in Gaza. You can follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast, and if you're feeling generous, leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you use. It really helps us out. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius-Smith. This episode has additional editing by Kaylee Jasperson, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have a great